The MediVedi Show without the Medi part.
Wait, I thought we were doing
Thank
this
you
together.
for your help. You
Vedi, you
can
said I
leave
prepped.
now.
I prepped for like an hour.
Get out. Thank you very
I prepped for like
much.
an hour.
Goodbye now.
I still love you, Vedi.
See ya.
Still love
Get
you.
out. Welcome everyone to episode 2 of the now newly named The Vedi Show. I had a lot of you commenting and asking questions as to why it was called the Vedius podcast, because it's not actually a podcast. And I tried to say it was a joke because I never got invited to podcasts, so I thought I'd make my own podcast with just me. And then you're all just like, but it's not a podcast. Maybe you should invite other people. And they're like, well, that would defeat the point. So now I've renamed it. I did give you all an option as to what I would rename it to. And then I ignored all those options and I instead just called it The Vedi Show. So welcome to The Vedi Show. This is, of course, episode 2. Today we will be talking about North America and their chances at Worlds this year. We're going to be looking at the expectations, the strengths and weaknesses, the play styles of all these teams, which are Clutch Gaming, Team Liquid, and Cloud9. And we're going to be talking about, and we're going to be looking at some replays and examples of evidence that I used to try and support some of my arguments, or at least why I'm led to believe why I think the way that I do. Now, of course, there are some caveats to this that I didn't mention in episode 1, but I do not have the time to go through an entire regular season, so a lot of the footage that I've looked at is the most recent footage. Things like I will have watched the semifinals, both the C9 one and the Team Liquid one. I watched the finals, and I watched the TSM versus Clutch Gaming series. So I tried to watch 2 best of 5 for each team. So of course I don't quite have a full split of knowledge. I only have the most recent knowledge, and of course what that does mean and the problems with that mean that I may not get to see the peak performance of these teams. I only get to see their most recent performance, which means that I may not be 100% accurate, but I do feel confident that I can infer a lot of information about these teams and what we can expect of them coming into the World Championship. So with that out of the way, what I wanted to do was I wanted to start with Clutch. The main reason why I wanted to start with Clutch is because I think I've got a lot more to say about the other teams, and I think if we're honest, this team is quite straightforward. The macro isn't the best, the roster isn't exactly full of world-class talent, and sometimes their drafts are weird, to say the least. We only have to think back to the Pantheon game in Game 1 versus Team Liquid. TSM, my apologies, versus TSM, and then the Game 5 where they drafted the Karma and some of the weird stuff up against the likes of TL. So sometimes their drafts are a little crazy. So I think we can be realistic in how we see Clutch. They're not the best team. People don't expect a lot from them, and I don't think we need to lie about that. No one's really expecting them to make quarterfinals. No one's really expecting them to make a deep run at Worlds. They should get out of play-ins. However, I don't want to just spend all this time shitting on Clutch. I want to tell you some of the awesome things about Clutch and what you can be excited for about Clutch and the things you want to be watching for when it comes to Clutch Gaming. And for the EU fans watching, and for NANA fans that were watching Worlds last year, you'll remember a team like Vitality. And Clutch and Vitality are very, very similar in how they approach the game. They are like 2 peas in a pod. They were both very aggressive. They both have a very similar style. They both have fantastic top laners. They have heavy play making mids. Their bot lane is a little volatile. Their jungler just likes to gank a lot and get in your face. And like they're very similar. So you know, the team it's all or nothing. You know, they're extremely aggressive and they're full of confidence. They have that blind confidence about them, right? And I wanted to try and showcase some of this confidence that they do show, and I have this very first clip that I wanted to demonstrate to you. So let's flip on over and let's have a look at this clip. And this is Game 3, Clutch Gaming versus TSM in the Gauntlet, and you'll notice that TSM are about to take the Drake. Now at this point, there's nothing for Clutch to fight over. There just isn't. They don't need to fight TSM here. They're not going to gain anything off the back of it. You can see that Ezreal is bot lane. He needs to catch that wave. Doesn't it matter? Of course it doesn't matter. This is Clutch Gaming. This is a team that gets in your face and they fight. And you can just see, like, they're not fighting over anything. They're just fighting because they can. And TSM's not expecting it. It doesn't make any sense, but it doesn't matter because Clutch convert this into 2 quick kills. And now they walk away happy. They get a bit of deep vision. Like, yeah, they don't convert it into much, but they fought you and they won. And that is Clutch Gaming in a nutshell. That is exactly what you can expect from Clutch, and that's just the kind of team that they are. Now, the thing is, this team has real potential when it comes to upsetting teams at Worlds, partly because they don't make sense. But that is honestly what is so great about them. They're so similar to Vitality, and everyone can remember, like, they did some of the weirdest stuff. They picked champions that didn't make sense. They did stuff that you were just like, what the hell? But it caught you off guard. You weren't expecting it. It was fun to watch, and they created a lot of upsets. And I think you can come in with that same mentality for Clutch. There are no expectations on them. There are no predefined states or game plans that they need to follow. They just need to play their own style. They just need to do what they're good at, and they can do some real damage and create a lot of chaos in whatever group they end up in. Because I'm really confident that they'll make it out of playing. So I have a pitch. I have a pitch for how I think this team can win. Right. So step 1, they need to draft strong skirmishing and team fight champions. Okay. Step 2, they need to give the bot lane something that can survive, because you're never ganking bot lane. Bot lane is an island. You're leaving it alone. You're just letting it do its thing, right? Step 3, you've got to give Lyra something that he can gank on. And then step 4, this is the most important part. You got to give Huni a carry. It's the holla time. He's coming back to Europe. Put him on something that can win games. And then the simple step 5 is you just style on kids, right? So if you ever see this draft coming out from Clutch, it's doomed. See this carry for Huni, okay? This is an engage, team fighting, mid-game, early game jungler that can get things going for the 2 solo laners. Look, another playmaker, strong mid-game power supply. Like, bot lane doesn't need resources. It's all about survivability and getting... If Clutch get this comp, it's over for you. It's doomed. There's nothing you can do, because this is prime Clutch Gaming, and this is the Clutch Gaming that will create chaos and will win games and upset people at the World Championship. So that's what you need to watch out for. That's what you need to look for, and that's what you need to be excited about. I'm excited about Clutch Gaming. I think they're going to be great. And so I talked about Huni, and this is the thing that I really wanted to highlight. Like, the thing about Huni is that I've combined. I have created a bit of a highlight reel of Huni. Okay, so look, this is Huni. This is why you put him on a carry, right? You're watching Huni, you see him on the gangplank. This is gangplank. This is Huni. Look at him. There's a full health 80 carry there. There's half the health gone. Easy. This gangplank is 1v9ing right now. This is one of the reasons why you want to give Huni a carry. Reason number 2. Boom. Let's jump over straight to the next clip. Look at him. Look at Huni. Do you see him here? Sven, again, 80 carry. Thinks he's safe. He just gets one shot. Doesn't stand a chance. This is why you want to give Huni carries. He's popping off right now. You want to play through him. You can trust him. He's going to make plays. And I know you're going to be like, oh, but Vedius, Huni is a wild card. He randomly dies in a side lane. That's why you've got to like protect the convoy, right? That's what I think of Huni. He is someone you've got to guide through the stages, you know? You've got to escort him to the safety zone, and then once he's in the safety zone, the convoy turns into a death machine, and it runs around, and it's like a robot, and it's killing everyone, and it's destroying everything, and you're just like, you know, it's gonna be like, Huni has been activated. You know, like that's the point that you want to get Huni to. So the main point that I'm trying to get at is that what I want from Clutch Gaming going into the World Championship is I want this, okay? I want them to play this music, and I want them to watch this video. So here we go.
Europe and NA teams in general, there was always this chase. There was this chase about catching up to Korea, catching up to China, always trying to learn from them. But something that I've realized is that, you know, the inspiration that everyone got from Misfits, that 5-game series where they did their own thing, they came in with their own idea. and they showed up big time. That was my philosophy coming into this year all around. We brought our own flair, and G2, when they showed up in their style, they're winning. When Fnatic are doing their style, they're winning. Just stay true to yourselves. Do not try to chase anyone. Don't try to copy anyone. Just be confident. Don't limit yourselves either. Go into this tournament, play your next games, believing that you can win everything. That is the mentality you need to have to conquer the best. Because anything is possible if you just believe and play with confidence and stay true to yourselves. So do that for me, Euro.
NA. Powerful words. Powerful words. Very, very powerful words. Anyway, so that was Clutch Gaming. Right. So if they just do that, they'll be fine. Right. Let's get back on track and let's start talking about Team Liquid. So, Team Liquid. Let's start a little bit about their playstyle. Liquid has the best North American roster that has ever actually been in the LCS. Let's be real. I know I'm going to be a lot of people like, no, but TSM, don't you remember that roster from that one time at Worlds? Shut up. This is the best roster that North America has ever produced. I don't think it's the best possible roster that they will ever produce, but for now, this is the best one that they've got. It made MSI Finals last split. It's got 4 back-to-back titles. You can't really dispute it. This is a great team, right? They've got great players across the board. They're the most successful. They have fantastic infrastructure. They are very good, right? They also, their playstyle is very much what I would define as textbook League of Legends, where they typically use early lane pressure, they convert this pressure into objective control, and then they move this pressure around the map, slowly taking more objectives, and they'll just balloon their gold lead more and more and more. They then use team fights as a means to secure the bigger objectives, which they'll then use to slowly close out the game. Now, this playstyle naturally has strengths and weaknesses attached to it. So we're going to focus in on the strengths first. As I mentioned, relative to NA, this roster is stacked, and basically every role can be considered the best, if not the second best, except for maybe jungle, which we'll go into a little bit later, right? Now, a lot of the early game pressure that this team generates comes from their bot lane because of how overwhelmingly better they are than pretty much anyone else in North America. So I do have some clips prepared to showcase this. So we're going to use this one first. I'm going to switch over to that one right now. So here's just a very brief example of how much better Doublelift is than some of the other bot lanes. Of course, this is only one example, but you only have to watch the final to see the difference. And like, I have more examples prepared later on, but like things like this, really, really simple. This just showcases why the bot lane is so much better. They regularly punish your very simple mistakes, and they use this to gain lane pressure and lane advantages, right? And this is something that has been regular throughout the regular season for this team because of how much better they are than pretty much everyone else, especially in like mid and bot. It's very easy for them to kind of to build those advantages. It also helps that, I talked about mid and bot. Jensen is also significantly better now than he was at MSI, and it's not only because he's performing well in lane, but when he gets these advantages, he's also starting to roam a lot more to help his side lane. So I also wanted to showcase this, where he's actually just way more active on the map than I feel he's ever really been. And I feel like this is something that he learned a lot from MSI. So if you watch him here, notice how he's pushed in this wave, and as the reset is happening, he knows that Lyra is on the top side, and he uses this as an opportunity to get a kill. And now he goes from 2-0-0 to 3-0-0. And like, just this awareness of using where you have pressure and converting it into advantages elsewhere is just really good play. And like, throughout both the semifinals and the finals, we just saw Jensen roaming way more than we ever really have. And for me, like, it's great to see that, because your ability to transition your pressure outside of lane to everywhere else is what made Cap so good at MSI, and it defined him and how many more advantages he could get for his team versus even the likes of Faker. So for me, I feel like Jensen has developed more as a player since MSI, and I'm excited to see how he can use that moving into the World Championship as well. Now, as mentioned, Xmithie then uses this pressure to maintain river control and get deeper vision for his laners to then leverage. So Xmithie's main job is basically just getting a lot of vision down. And what you'll see Impact do a lot is he will roam from top lane down to mid lane a lot, and he moves a lot around that. He regularly moves to his team, so the team is very centered around playing around their two core carries, who are exceptional players and definitely, in my opinion, two of the strongest players that North America has right now. So the next clip that I wanted to show you is pretty simple, Fundamental League, and it showcases how TL move around the map with the early pressure that they're able to generate. So if we have a look at this clip, what you'll notice, this is I should be saying this for the audience-only listeners, audio-only listeners, but we're in TL versus CG Game 1 of their semi-final match, and you'll notice that the Drake has already been taken by Team Liquid. This is the first Inferno was taken, and rather than stay bot in the 2 versus 2, even though they actually are doing pretty well in terms of the lane, they move out of the lane and they start moving up towards Rift Herald. Now, because Clutch is a team that will always fight for Rift Herald, they move first and they get in a position to siege. But then, of course, they can then, because they know that they've made this move first, they get to siege onto this, and they also get to threaten a play top, where they then see someone overextended, and they're able to find a pick onto Huni. And this is just very core, very textbook. It's expected, and this is where a bit of criticism needs to be thrown towards Huni, because it's textbook because Cody Sun and Vulcan are even rotating top because they expect this play to come out, and because Clutch play for literally every Rift Herald at 10 minutes. So this was just a showcase, a very small one, a very brief one, of just how Team Liquid like to play very textbook. They're very calculated in their approach. They're very smooth, very clean, and they when they get early advantages, they move their pressure around the map very fluidly, very easily, and very cleanly. So TL is also very similar to SKT in that they often use and rely on objectives to force fights, which they then use to win games. Sometimes they force a fight before an objective happens, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So the next clip that I wanted to show you was very much around team fighting. And this is just a really very clean Baron, basically, from the side of Team Liquid. And I just wanted to reinforce that, North America gets a lot of crap for, the NA RAM and how, they don't actually have good macro, but what I really wanted to showcase with this example is notice how they push up mid, they push up top, and then very calmly and cleanly they move into the enemy jungle and they get vision control. CG is kind of suffocated because there's a lot of pressure points on the map that they have to deal with, and then Team Liquid uses this as an opportunity to engage. Now, this will tie in a little bit with TL's need to overforce fights. Sometimes they commit a little too hard, and this is a bit of an indication of that, because they could threaten the Baron a little bit more, they could gain mid control wave. So I would not say that they were perfect, especially not in this example, and we'll cover a couple more a little bit later on, but the point still stands. It's a clean fight, there are very few mistakes from it, and overall it's good map control and good objective setup. So this then results in the Baron, and this is how you see TL play the game a lot. They'll use a big objective like this in order to force a fight, and then they'll use that team fight win with their gold lead in order to convert it into a big objective. So I think I had a couple more. Yeah, so all in all, for any EU fans watching, this team can be very easily associated with the likes of Schalke. Their playstyle, their play pattern, where the jungler invests their attention, the fact that top lane gets ignored, they're incredibly similar stylistically. And I'm not trying to sit there and say that Schalke and Team Liquid are 1 for 1, but for those that may not have watched a lot of LCS, Schalke is the closest thing to Team Liquid that Europe has. When you think about how they play the early game, you would argue that, Trick usually plays around his points of pressure. He often hangs around mid lane a lot, but he also invests a lot of his time bot lane. A lot of their engage comes from the likes of Ignar in the mid game, and They have a superstar AD carry, their mid laner plays a Kali every game, their top laner gets left on an island and he's forced to group up with the team. Like you can see how there are a lot of similarities, and Schalke is very comparable to Team Liquid, and I'm not here to debate who's better, like that's not the point. I just wanted to give any EU fans who haven't watched a lot of LCS some kind of comparison that they can use to then try and understand, which nicely then brings us on to our weaknesses. For those that did watch the the LEC semifinals, which was between Schalke and Fnatic, you remember that playstyle of Schalke got absolutely obliterated, and a large part of that is because textbook playstyle means that usually you followed a straightforward step-by-step process. So when steps get ruined or interrupted, or someone rips a page out, there's no actual page on what to do next. So a large part of why Fnatic really dismantled Schalke in that semi-final was because they're a team that's very good at generating a lot of early game pressure, creating a lot of chaos, and attacking your side lanes very rapidly and in quick succession. And it doesn't give you time for like proper setup, it doesn't give you an opportunity to think. You're constantly under a barrage of attacks, and that style can suffer. So remember that for Team Liquid, this is also a similar issue, and we'll explore it a little bit in a moment. Now remember that a lot of the advantages that TL generate in the early game come from their superior laners. If these laners are shut down for whatever reason, or for TL to follow the textbook, now it becomes a lot harder, and they don't know how to pivot. So I'm going to repeat this because I think it's really, really important. Team Liquid, for the most part, their leads come from Jensen and Doublelift. A lot. And especially when you look at both the semifinals and the finals, their most convincing early game leads came from when either Doublelift obliterated lane or Jensen obliterated lane. Like, this is a very common thing that Team Liquid have done, I feel, throughout the regular season. And while I haven't watched super intently and can pretend that I have done like deep dives into their play, I can be pretty confident in saying that these two players are the ones that normally generate the early game leads for their team, and usually they do it by themselves, right? Obviously, like Core JJ is with it's like the Core JJ plus Doublelift duo bot lane, but they don't actually like get a huge amount of jungle like ganks. They actually just get those advantages themselves because of how much better they are than a lot of their opposition. Pardon me, sorry about that. Now, this results in two problems for Team Liquid, because remember, these two pieces are very, very important. The first is that this team has an unhealthy obsession with the Drake, probably more so than SKT do. If you heard me talk about it in episode 1, I talk a lot about how SKT very much rely on Drake to force a lot of fights and build their advantages. TL just contest almost every Drake, and I have so many examples to support this statement. I don't want to go through all of them right now because it's just not worth it. I will show you a few examples, but they will contest you for so many Drakes. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, some I wasn't really sure if it made sense, but regardless, one thing I can say for sure is that the Dragon is a place where Team Liquid will fight a lot. This means that when their laners get put behind, sometimes they will still go for these fights anyway. So this is what we're going to look at in this next example for the Drake. Now, to set the scene, this is game 2 of the finals between Cloud9 and Team Liquid. You'll notice that in terms of the early game, Cloud9 actually have an advantage. They're about 2k gold ahead, they have the kill advantage, and Jensen is on Vladimir, and he is behind against Niski Zirelia. Meanwhile, Doublelift has been heavily ganked in bot lane, and they have fallen behind Sneaky and Zazel. So Team Liquid are down in items, their comp scales and isn't as strong at this point in the game, and we're 9 minutes in and it is the first mountain. C9 get to the Drake first. They're in a position of power. Now, admittedly, Licorice and TL do not, Licorice and Impact do not have TP, but Impact starts to move. Now, C9 is fine with this because they recognize how far away he is, and the Vladimir is pushed under tower, and Doublelift and Core JJ are under tower. And even in this situation, TL should not try and contest the Drake. They can't. It doesn't make sense to. Yet, They try and do it anyway. They see that Impact is roaming down and they think they can go for this play and they try to set up a collapse. But of course, in this period of time, C9, they finish the Drake, they collapse on the flank, and they find themselves 2 quick kills, and now Doublelift and Core JJ are put even further behind than before. And this is only one example, but you will see many examples like this from Team Liquid. And it is because I do not know why, but they feel the need to challenge and contest a lot at the Drake pit. And it's dangerous because it ends up in situations like this. And they were only about 2k core behind, and now they end up 3k core behind because of this play. And it's a play that they didn't need to make, and they didn't really need to force. Right? This then leads on to another problem, which is partly tied to the first, and that is that, as we mentioned earlier, teams that play fast and play a hard skirmish style can easily take advantage of TL because they don't play well and they have to react quickly and outside the norm. So we're immediately going to jump into our next clip, which is, once again, C9 versus Team Liquid, same game, right? So this is earlier on in the game, okay? So as you can see in this situation, there's a bit of a skirmish going on in bot. Zeyzal takes a lot of damage. But notice that Xmithy is ganking top lane, right? And Jensen is pushed under his tower, as he has been pretty much all laning phase. And Doublelift and Core JJ don't have that many summoner spells. Svenskeren is pathing bot, right? So as this play plays out, you can see that, look, this is a great opportunity. I love that the Observer showed this. So the Observers showcase how much vision Doublelift and Core JJ have, which is little to none. They know that their jungler is topside, they have vision in enemy topside jungler, and they know that this Gromp is up, and they also should be aware that these camps are up as well. So there should be more than enough information for TL to assume that the jungler is bot side, right? So after this trade, what they need to do is immediately run and disengage. Right? Now, the only reason why they would consider staying is because they have double TP and they just kill top lane, which means that should a fight break out, they can instantly teleport and they can turn this into a 4 versus 4. So even if the jungler is top, it doesn't matter. But what ends up happening, they try to base. They don't expect this to happen. And then look at how long they fight for and look at how long it takes the TPs to come in. They're already on death's door and then the TPs come in. But at this point, the TPs are too late because now Licorice has had time to respawn. He's now TPing in and Skarner's top, which means that regardless of what happens here, TL are at a numbers disadvantage, which means that they're guaranteed to lose the fight. So they get dived and this blows the game wide open for C9. And it's one of those situations where in the moment, TL did not react as well as they could have. And it's something that you'll see a lot from Team Liquid, where when the pressure is on and they're forced to react in the moment, they don't always think everything through and read the game state well enough to decide whether or not that course of action is the best one. And as a result, it gets punished. Now, obviously, like, reacting to that is very challenging, but when you think about a lot of the teams that are going to Worlds, like a Cloud9 is one of them, but Fnatic, G2, FPX, Damwon, these teams that are very fast-paced, the ones that are always about like getting in your face, creating aggression, like they will naturally react very, very quickly to these kind of situations, and they're more likely to early TP to dissuade you from making this play in the first place, rather than delaying it to see if it really is necessary. And they're also very good at reading the state of the map and recognizing, does this make sense or not? And I just feel that there is a gap between Team Liquid and those teams. And this was just one of those examples, and there are others, but this is just one that I think demonstrated well how sometimes TL can struggle when pressure is thrown at them and they don't know how to react in the moment. So there are 2 other major weaknesses for TL. I'm sorry. I know I'm going pretty hard on TL, but given that they're North America's first seed, I really wanted to talk about some of the things that really stood out to me. And I do hope that I did some of the big strengths justice, as I also talk about some of the big weaknesses for Team Liquid. So there are 2 major ones that I think can also be taken advantage of. So we already talked about how they like to contest Drakes, but in a similar vein, this team has a tendency to overforce team fights. Now, do you remember in the first example that I showed you with the Baron, how I talked about like their objective setup was good and how normally they rely on a fight before they feel confident enough to take the Baron? And in that replay, I was talking a little bit about how in this situation, they actually kind of overforce the fight a little bit more than they need to. Well, there are actually quite a few examples of Team Liquid doing this. And what's important to note is often that their decisions to fight are not terrible ones. Like when they made that Baron fight, that wasn't like a terrible decision to fight there. I never sat there and thought, oh, this fight doesn't make sense. But what I do find myself saying is, okay, I understand the idea of why you're fighting, but did you really need to do this? And I have something that I think is the best example of this from Team Liquid. So this is game 1 between Team Liquid and Cloud9 of the finals. And the first thing I want to draw your attention to is notice how they have pressure on top, they have pressure on bot, and now they're looking to collapse on mid so that they can take this mid tower. Very common, very like textbook play, as you may call it, right? And basically the idea is that you split C9 up so they're forced to catch these minion waves, and then you can create a numbers advantage mid, and you can threaten a dive in order to force the defenders away from this tower so that you can take it without contest, right? And the goal here is that you want to threaten the dive. Now, Xmithie and Impact in this situation are in position to threaten that dive, yet in this situation, you can see that, like, okay, the minion waves get cleared, the ultimate comes out from Xmithie. They then go underneath the tower. The tower gets taken, yet they still try to force this fight, and even after they've lost it, they still then go in again. And you can see how this is one of those situations where you're like, again, I understand what you're doing here, Team Liquid. You know, like, this all makes sense to me. But did you need to force this fight? Did you need to make this kind of a play? And this is something that I do feel that I see quite a lot from Team Liquid, where sometimes I feel like they do what I call throwing your wallet at your opponent, where they pick fights that they know they can win just because of how overwhelmingly big their gold advantage is. And that's where I say a lot, okay, I understand why you've gone for this fight, but did you need to go for this fight? Because if the gold was even, this fight had a real risk of going horribly wrong. But of course, because the gold is not even, there's like a 7 or 8 or 10k gold disparity, really it's fine, and they end up making it fine because it is fine. But the question that I always have is, did you need to do this? And against better teams, it can be very dangerous, and you can cost a lot. And in this situation, the Reaper I just showed you, they lost 2 members. And fortunately for TL, there's very little that C9 could really convert off the back of that. But imagine both those kills go onto an Uzi instead of a Sneaky, right? Now the game kind of looks a little bit differently because Uzi now has more gold in his back pocket. And to me, I feel like it's a weakness that they need to rein in and take control of moving into the World Championship, because it is something that I believe can be taken advantage of. So the final weakness that I wanted to address, which may upset some people, is their jungler. Now, I want to preface this by saying that I do not think Xmithie is a terrible jungler. It is more that, in my opinion, he does not meet or better enable what is effectively a team of superstars. So I think one of the easiest comparisons to make is him versus Jankos, right? And this may be a bad comparison if you're an LCS fan watching and you don't watch the LEC. And I have another example to use afterwards, so don't worry about it. But for any of the EU fans watching, when you watch when you watch Jankos play with G2, you can see how he better enables all of the star players that he has on his roster. You can see how he will make level 2 ganks happen mid so that he can guarantee caps pressure. He can burn a flash, which then makes that mid lane matchup easier for his team. Or in the bot lane, he will always be there to cover when his bot lane is at risk of getting dived. Or he'll be in a position to counter gank so the Wonder's getting gold advantage, and the bot lane is like just forced to concede in those situations. And you can see a lot of instances where Jankos further empowers what is already a superstar roster. And you can say the same thing for like Clid. Clid does a lot to make Faker better. He enables Faker to be Faker. He helps Teddy and Effort get through laning phases. Like, he makes that team stronger than they are. Same for Canyon, right? Like, same for Casa, right? And like, you can see how there are these top tier junglers that better enable their rosters to really fulfill the full potential that these laners do have. And I feel like Xmithie is someone that does not necessarily do that for Team Liquid. And to bring it back to North America, I feel like you can see that the most when he plays against Svenskeren. You can really see the difference in how they approach the game and the amount of early game pressure that Svenskeren puts out versus what Xmithie is able to put out. And you might argue that, well, Sven trades his farm for ganks, which is true. But you then don't get to make the argument that Xmithie is then spending his time like gank farming and being like super efficient with his pathing, or that he's tracking the enemy jungler, because he's not. And I have an example to like support this point as well. So this clip is game 4, Team Liquid versus Cloud9 in the finals, right? And you can see that for Xmithie in the early game, pardon me, sorry, once again, in the early game, Xmithie doesn't have a lot of ganks that he can look for, right? So his whole goal and his whole responsibility should be to cover his laners so that they can get successful bounces off and they can set the wave up for success, or he should be looking to cover his laners so that they don't get dived or disaster strikes or whatever, right? So just bear that in mind when we watch Xmithie, okay? So a very common Skarner path in the early game is to do a full topside clear and either base for boots or then do a full clear. Same for Gragas, right? So they're pretty confident that they know Svenskeren is starting his red, Xmithie is starting his red. And notice here, you can see that these pings are coming down from Svenskeren, so you're very aware that Svenskeren knows where Xmithie is, right? So he knows that he's bot side, and he also has this ward placed here, so they have full information. They know exactly where Xmithie is, right? Now, you can assume that Xmithie, I believe a ping did come down around here, or it does at some point, that also gives indication that, hey, you got to be careful, this guy's around here. So Xmithie chooses to base in this situation. Look, you can see these pings coming down. He's like, be careful, there's a good chance that Svenskeren might be hanging around the bot side of the map, right? So Jensen has to respect that, and that's why he's playing towards the top side of the lane, okay? So he then goes base. And this is where things get pretty interesting for Xmithie, because Svenskeren decides not to go base and he's doing a full clear. The reason why he's doing a full clear is because he wants to path up towards top and he wants to cover Licorice, so that he can push this wave in and get a bounce back, right? Now, obviously, in this instance, what they're not expecting is Licorice then just effectively kills Impact. But even then, he's basically just hanging around here to cover top and also to play for this top Scuttle Crab, right? Pretty common, not too crazy. Now, Xmithie, you'll notice that he's moved into the bot river, right? And then what he does is he moves into the enemy jungle. He drops a control ward here, and this control ward, fine, not a problem. But then he drops this ward, and this ward doesn't make any sense, because you should have known, and the indication based on the pings was that they knew that the jungler has already cleared bot side. You should expect Gragas to either go to base or to path up towards top. Those are the two places that Gragas should be right now. So he's wasting time putting this deep ward in, right? Then he goes to the Scuttle Crab, right? So bear in mind, this whole bot side has been delayed in terms of when it's actually being cleared, right? Which is a pretty big deal. Okay, so top lane dies, that sucks. Unfortunate play from Impact, he messes up, right? So he then goes to the Scuttle Crab. Then he realizes that Kiana, because of the early bounce back that Jensen was setting up, gets an opportunity to roam. Now, this is obviously going to cost him a lot in terms of farm and experience, but they want to punish this guy for TPing. And they also know that this guy isn't here, and they pinged that he was hanging around the bot side of the map. So they were like, well, okay, we now have full information on where Xmithie is, and Xmithie, not knowing what to do here, dances up and down in the river. He even gets spotted. They're like, question mark, what is he doing here? This doesn't make any sense. I guess we'll just happily sit in top lane and we're fine. Now this ultimately, like, there's not much you can do about this. You can't expect Impact to die and then have to TP back into lane so early. This sucks, right? But because of the amount of time that he's wasted here, he can't threaten anything on the bot side of the map. He can't try and zone this duo away from the tower. And you could argue, well, okay, it's a Skarner, maybe he can't do that anyway, right? Whatever, that's fine. But the real problem then comes next, because he is now doing his blue into bot side clear, okay? Now, meanwhile, Gragas is now resetting. So he's level 4. The only camp that he's missed is this one, which is pretty normal. And he's now going to path straight to bot because his Krogs are respawning, right? So if we very quickly just jump past the replay, he's going to path straight to bot lane. And you can see he's now hanging around bot lane. His Krogs have respawned. But Xmithie is now pathing back towards top. He's not in a position to cover for this. He's not in a position, like, he is never in the place where Svenskeren is. Xmithie is never actually, like, So this idea that Xmithie is this tracking jungler, like, he's not tracking Svenskeren at all. He's not covering him, and this ward doesn't even spot Kiana out. It gives this false sense of security to this bot lane, who's now not even really overextended, but they're in a position to get ganked. So what happens? Oh, Svenskeren comes in, and he gets ganked. Now, of course, these pings come out a little bit too late. You can see that the pings do end up coming out here from, I'm not sure if they're from Xmithie, you can assume so, but like he's like, oh, bot Krogs is alive, and we've just spotted out that Kiana is here. But of course, too little, too late. And then they end up getting engaged on, and then they lose their summoner spells, and then they're forced back. And you can just see how, and then the worst part about this is then Xmithie then helps the jungler by going into the enemy jungle, stealing this away, and bear in mind that this hasn't been killed. So it actually starts the rubber banding for Svenskeren, and it helps him. And like, there are other examples of this. There are other examples of where Xmithie's early pathing doesn't make sense, and it's why he doesn't have the same like early game impact that someone like a Svenskeren does. And you can see how he hasn't really assisted or enabled any of his lanes in the early game. He hasn't covered, he hasn't counter ganked, he hasn't protected. And this was in the final. And you can find other examples like this in the final as well. And I just feel that there is evidence to suggest that Xmithie does not do for his laners what other top tier junglers do for their laners. And I think this is a problem, because Jensen and Doublelift build leads for themselves. And there is overwhelming evidence to show that throughout the regular season and in the finals itself. But they won't be able to do that in the final, at Worlds. They won't. Like, you can't rely on Jensen and Doublelift like being able to just be better than their lane opponents, because the reality of that is that it's not the case. And this then makes it harder for Team Liquid, because their ability to get early advantages then gets harder. And if they're not getting early advantages and teams are like willing to fight them and they draft in a way that can answer Team Liquid, you can see how the game slowly starts to get harder and harder. And because of how Xmithie likes to play, he never plays around his top side. He almost always focuses on covering his bot. And when he does go mid, like more often than not, he doesn't really do much to actually enable Jensen. He's just kind of there. And the best example that I have is in the final game. He comes mid to try a gank. It doesn't work out, so he leaves. Then Svenskeren comes mid to help Niski push out the wave, and Jensen 1v2 kills them. Right? And so I'm not trying to... I know it comes across as me shitting on Xmithie, right? And my intent here is to not sit there and call him a garbage jungler, because I don't think he is a garbage jungler. And I think... as far as players go and as far as junglers go, like, he's not a terrible jungler. And, you know, the example that I showcased, even though it looks bad, right, like, it's not the end of the world, and there are other things that Xmithie can do for his team and does do for his team. But I feel like that there is a noticeable gap just between him and Svenskeren, which means that there's likely going to be a bigger gap against him and some of the world's best junglers that will be going to the World Championship. And this is something that I think Team Liquid is really going to struggle with, in the same way that Pobelter struggled against international mid laners in the past when he played with this roster. So, with that in mind, when it comes to expectations for Team Liquid, I think TL do have to be worried when going into groups. I think the way in which they've won in NA will not be as reliable on an international stage, and I think their limited playstyles means that it's easy to plan, prep, and shut down this team. Of course, they're still a smart team, and they do have fantastic players. They do really have great players. So depending on the group, there is a chance for them, but if I was an NA fan, I would be quite nervous about TL going into the World Championship. Now, of course, I'll reiterate this at the end, but there is a lot of time between now and group stages. There is plenty of opportunities for TL to learn and improve, and I'm not saying that what you see from the final is what we'll get from them at the World Championship, and there's no guarantee that teams will even be able to like maybe Jensen and Doublelift will have pop-off performances, and maybe they won't just like get crushed in the early game. And if those are the cases and they're allowed to follow their structure and follow the textbook, we have plenty of evidence to showcase that this team knows how to play when they have an advantage. This team is smart. They do have a good grasp of the fundamentals of the league. They are a great team. There are just some things that hold them back that worry me about them going into international competition. So I hope the evidence was fair. I hope that too many NA fans don't get angry at me. Don't worry. When I make the EU one next week, I will be throwing a lot of shade towards Europe as well. So please don't think that this is me just trying to shit on NA. So with that out of the way, let's now go on to Cloud9. Cloud9 is, of course, the savior of North America once more, the team that every time breathes hope and life into the region with their dramatic Worlds performances. The way I'm reading that, it's like I'm reading it off a script or something. Basically, Cloud9, it's tough to make an argument, especially given that we saw them lose to TL in the finals, especially in the way that they did, that they have a greater shot at doing better at Worlds than Team Liquid do. But one of the main reasons why I think I personally have a little bit more faith in Cloud9 than I do Team Liquid is just because of their jungler Svenskeren. In my opinion, it is easier for a good jungler to get good laners leads than it is for good laners to try and build them for themselves, right? Sorry, I should explain that. If you have a great jungler and good laners versus great laners, right? It is easier for a great jungler to get good laners ahead than it is for great laners to get advantages themselves against other great laners, right? So let's focus in on the playstyle, and I'll talk a lot more about Svenskeren a little bit more. Cloud9 is pretty much the opposite of TL in terms of their approach to the game. They're pretty fast-moving, they're pretty free-flowing, and their entire game plan is very much dictated by their jungler. Based on what I saw in both the semis and finals, it was really easy for me to understand why Sven earned the title of MVP, and why he has a great shot at competing with some of the best junglers in the world. What I find fascinating is how he pivots his playstyle depending on the opponent. So versus CLG, he focused on camping Niski and trying to snowball that lane, then moving Niski to his side lane. So like what we saw a lot of in their game versus CLG was stuff like this. So like he would gank mid, and he would burn summoner spells, and then immediately after he would come back. Just a couple minutes later, and he'd be like, oh, hello, you have no flash. Whoop. And then they would get more kills. And you can see they invested quite a lot to this, but it was very much about like trying to get Niski ahead because they thought that Power of Evil was one of the biggest threats, right? And like the bot lane would typically go pretty even, right? But then this completely pivoted when they went up against Team Liquid. And what you'll see is that at this time, Svenskeren focuses his attention on playing around the bot side of the map. And this play, by the way, was like really clever from Svenskeren, and I'll show you why. So remember how we talked about how Skarner usually does a full clear in the bases, or he then he does a full red side clear into then basing into boots, or he does a full jungle clear. Sejuani can do a very similar path, and she often does. Whereas what Svenskeren does this time around is he starts on the bot side of the map. Then what he does is he moves into the river, and notice that he uses his sweeper, because the only way he gets spotted out, right, is if there is vision in here. So he then comes down at level 3 to then gank a level 2 bot lane. And bear in mind, this is a Kai'Sa Braum lane. So like you have an Aurelia and you have an Kled. And so coming into this game, my expectations are he's going to look to play around these lanes early so their lanes can be set up for success. But what does he do? He sets up a gank into bot lane. And look at how effective this is, right? Like he knows that there is a gap between double lift and sneaky, right? And he knows that if left in the 2 versus 2, that double lift is just going to smash sneaky. And like we already looked at a replay earlier of that happening, right? And so when they played up against Team Liquid, he put way more resources into ganking bot. Like way more resources. Like every single game he was just bot lane, bot lane, bot lane, bot lane. Like Double F and Claudia J were playing 3 versus 2 that series, right? And sometimes it didn't help because Sneaky and Zazel still messed up and they still died, but other times it really did close the gap. And when Double F and Claudia J don't have summoners to play the way that they like, and they don't have the bot lane pressure that TL like to leverage, then it really puts them behind. So overall, like, it's really good decision making, and it's just smart early pathing from Svenskeren that really does help his team, right? So that's why I love watching about him. I think that he's pretty good at pivoting and playing around where he needs to. And basically, this guy is the lifeblood of his team and basically makes what C9 able to compete with the high quality bar that is TL. So he basically closes the gap. So even if TL has better players, as I mentioned, he enables good players very well, and he can close the gap between that skill disparity by getting you advantages and making it harder for your opposition to play. So focusing more on their strengths and less on their playstyles. As mentioned, the biggest strength of this team is obviously their jungler. His early game pathing is smart and effective, and he often gets the laners that he needs to get ahead. This team is also a lot more flexible in their approach to the game. They're a lot more willing to play through any lane depending on what the comp needs, and laners will even make sacrifices to make sure that their teammates can gain advantages. Now, what I mean by that is, we have seen, both in the semifinals and the finals, Svenskeren play through top, play through mid, and play through bot. They are way more versatile in their willingness to play through every single lane compared to a team like Team Liquid, who typically and primarily play through bot, and sometimes they do play through mid as well. But the fact that they're willing to pivot just gives them a lot more draft options, which is really important. Because while Team Liquid, you often expect a very similar draft approach pretty much every single game, for C9, they get to be a lot more creative with the drafts. They're very flexible. They come up with all kinds of crazy stuff. And this gives them a lot more room to be adaptable in the game, but also to shake things up against better teams. This team is also less teamfight prone. As mentioned, they're a bit more free flow, and they're more likely to respond to the state of the map and utilize pressure more than the power of their champions. And I have a really cool example of this, which I loved, by the way. I love seeing this from teams when they choose to play the map rather than trying to team fight. So here we can see, like, look at the map state right now. So you can see they have a wave pushing in and top. So bear in mind, this is C9 versus COG game 1. They have about a 3k gold advantage. It's 22.5 minutes into the game. And Licorice has pushed in bot, Niski has pushed in top, and C9 is sieging onto the mid lane, right? So in this situation, as we mentioned earlier, do you remember when we showed that clip of TL earlier on, and how they did the same thing, and then they collapsed, and they threatened, and then they flanked here to look for a dive? What you're going to see is that CLG noticed the rotation come out from Licorice, and then they look to attack him, right? So they find Licorice, and they look to try and get that collapse. So C9, rather than trying to save their top laner, instead play around where they can gain pressure. So in this instance, look, they focus on clearing away the mid wave, Zeyzal hangs around to offer support, and then Gragas, Svenskeren, gets in a position where he can zone CLG and make it awkward for them to return to the lane. This then gives Sneaky and Zeyzal free access onto this mid tier 2. Meanwhile, because Power of Evil recognizes the situation that they're in, he's forced to move from top down to bot. So Niski stays top and he clears another wave. Okay, so they're generating pressure. So they're keeping top pressure, they're keeping mid pressure. Now notice the positioning of Niski. Niski will move into the enemy jungle and he will zone away CLG, right? Because he's now threatening a dive. Now, of course, 1 versus 5, he's not going to be able to do much. And we saw a bit of a cheeky ultimate there to get a bit of poke damage down. But, like, you can see how this is now awkward. So now Power of Evil and CLG can't respond to the top lane. So this wave now gets to access this tower for free. So then what they'll do is that they'll push this in. CLG is forced to take the long way around to go to the base. And then C9 get a free top tower. And then, of course, because CLG is, like, trying to respond, they're stuck with their tail between the legs. C9 get pressure mid again. They keep pressure bot. And then what do? They convert back down to Baron Dragon. And they get a free Mountain Drake. And COG is just lost. And that all starts because they tried to kill the top laner. And this is just like, this is just a good example of C9 looking at the state of the map and recognizing what they should be doing rather than going for a fight. And it's just like a great example of how to utilize pressure and how to move between lanes and how to smartly use your advantage rather than just relying on the strength of your champions to force fights and kill your opponents and then win through that way. Just I thought it was a really cool play, very clean League of Legends, and I liked it a lot. So this is just something that I think is cool from Cloud9, and that they come across to me as a team that is less teamfight prone, at least when they have control over the game. And we'll get to that in a second. Finally, they are actually very solid at snowballing a lead. The coolest thing about this is they actually improved from their semifinals to their finals. Now, I prepped a lot of clips, right? Coming for this video, talking about how I feel that Cloud9 really suck at getting deep vision. And I had all these clips prepared, right? And basically, when they're trying to siege, and when they're in that situation that you just saw them in the semifinals, and it was against COG, there's a lot of clips where they would set up these sieges and they wouldn't have deep vision of the enemy jungle. So they'd be afraid to move into Fog of War, even though they should have been able to get that information for free. But then in the final, this was completely different. So in that 1 week of time, they recognized this issue and they suddenly got a lot better at it. So maybe it was just a week where they were off, but I saw it quite a few times in that series, so I feel like Reap had sat them down and said, this is a problem, you guys need to fix this. And then they came into the final and then they fixed it. So I have another example of them fixing said problem. So if we flip on over, you'll notice, again, so we are now Team Liquid versus C9. This is game 3 of the final. C9 have an overwhelming advantage. They already have the Baron 23 minutes into the game. And what I want to draw your attention to is how they have prio over mid. A bit of a cheese play bot in that bot brush we're trying to set up from Team Liquid to try and catch C9 off guard, which they didn't fall for. And then look at what C9 is doing here. They get access initially, they get a bit of deep vision, and then what they do is they translate that pressure into the enemy jungle. And they put this wards down. And look at all this control they now have over the enemy bot side jungle. And it sets them up nicely because now they can control this. Team Liquid can't approach. They get control over the red buff. They get to set up for the bot wave. And then they get to set up for the bot tower where, of course, they will be able to dive impact, secure a kill, and convert this into a tower. So this is, again, another demonstration of C9 being a lot more willing to like snowball these leads and how clean and effective they are. And what stood out the most to me was how much they had improved from their semifinals to the finals. And like that then gives me a lot more confidence for Cloud9, because I feel like that they showcased, even at Worlds last year, do you remember how in the first week they actually really sucked? And then they heard the Yamato speech and then they played their style and then they made it out of groups and they found big wins. They beat Vitality in the tiebreaker. They just played the champions that they were good at and comfortable at. And I feel like that this team can make a lot of adaptation, a lot of growth in a very short space of time. And I credit a lot of that to Reaper because I think he has a pretty good understanding of the game. So all in all, their early game planning and execution is great thanks to Svenskeren being a great jungler. They're flexible in their approach to the game, and they're pretty solid at snowballing. But of course, this team still has their own slew of weaknesses, just like Team Liquid do, and just like a lot of players a lot of teams on the planet do. Their players are not world class. I feel like I've been subtly mentioning it throughout, and how like they have good players, but let's be real, they're not like the greatest. Like Svenskeren, I think, is an excellent jungler, and I think I would say that Licorice is probably the only one who I would consider someone that can like hold his own against the very top talent in the world. Like from what I recall, and I don't remember this super well, but like he did fine against the Shy at MSI, and like he held his own. But then you could also debate that Shy wasn't having a great tournament. But regardless, I think it's fair to say that like the two main carries of Niski and Sneaky are not quite world class. The main reason why I say that is because like they just make silly mistakes like the ones I'm about to show you on your screen. So I already showcased earlier how they messed up. So here we see at level 1, the Sneaky and Zazel messing up a trade really poorly, and like you don't get to see it on your screen, but if you have a look on the minimap, you'll notice that they position poorly. They lose the lane very early on. They're forced to heal already, and they get zoned back. And like this is a level 1 mistake. There's very little that Svenskeren can do about this. And then if we double speed it, so like this lane is already doomed now because of what was a very poor laning trade very early on, right? And then if we come to about 3 minutes in, which is just now, we'll then see Niski getting solo killed by Jensen. And Svenskeren does what he can to help here. But of course, Jensen's just going to TP back into lane, and he's going to have a massive advantage over his lane counterpart. So this is where it kind of ties in with both the point that I was talking about, where Doublelift and Jensen generate their own leads. And like, I hope this clip also helps support that argument, which is that these players are just that much better than pretty much everyone else in their region, and like, they're really good, and they can compete at a world-class level, and that's why you should always have high expectations for especially these two players specifically. But you also see some of the weaknesses in Niski and Sneaky, and if you're making these kind of mistakes against Doublelift and Jensen and they're punishing them, you can assume that the same will happen when you go up against the top LPL, LCK, and EU teams. So that's just one of the problems that C9 will have to find a way to overcome, in that the reality is the quality bar of their players are not all quite at the world-class level, which means that there's a real risk that they could get smashed, right? And like, don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of the Cloud9 boys, but to me it feels like that, you know, as I mentioned, the only laner that can really like hold his own is Licorice, and I think he was fine. Like, if you want, you can use the argument that last year even he was losing to, like, he got solo killed by Bwipo I think a couple times in their semi-final versus Fnatic, but that's quite outdated now. Like, I think that Licorice has actually gotten better since then. But yeah, I think this is an issue and something that C9 fans should be a little bit concerned about. Actually, the best example is like Sneaky versus Uzi last year. Everyone remember how that laning phase went in the group stages. It wasn't pleasant to watch. So yeah. Another weakness that I think Cloud9 has is that sometimes they enter states where they're not really sure what to do, so they take gambles. And for me, this one was a little bit harder to explain. But what I mean is that when the early game hasn't quite gone the way that they want it to, and they want to try and break the game open, they take that opportunistic approach and just pounce on small chances, right? And one of the best examples of this was in their series versus, again, Team Liquid in the final. Now, when I watched this, I actually thought that C9 threw away their game 4, but I was actually, when I rewatched it, I was wrong. The game was actually super even, very close. And it's because C9 didn't actually snowball the early game as hard as they wanted, largely because Niski had to make a lot of sacrifices to try and get top lane ahead, which, in my opinion, was the wrong lane for C9 to focus on. So what ends up happening is they come into the mid game, and the game is very even. So we end up in this situation where there's just like a lot of ping-ponging in farm, a lot of moving around the map, and C9 see an opportunity where it looks like Core JJ is overextended, right? So they have a numbers advantage. They think they can go for this pick, but like, think about what they're doing here. They're throwing everything at a Braum. This Braum has heal, and it's Braum. And on top of that, Cloud9 also don't have priority top, so LeBlanc is roaming down, and the Aatrox is also on his way from bot lane. So like, C9 are taking a gamble here. And Team Liquid is a very safe spot to... Now, of course, if C9 one-shot this Braum, they actually gain a decent amount of control, and they can look to siege in mid, because, of course, there's 2 members topside. So they can't actually just freely access the mid lane, and it does give C9 an opportunity to open up the mid lane tower, and then they suddenly gain a lot more control over the map. But, of course, the risk is it's a Braum. So, naturally, this Braum, quite tanky, survives quite a lot, and while they do kill the Ezreal... it ends up hurting them overall, because Impact gets a kill, Jensen gets another kill, they force all of C9 back, and I do believe that off the back of this, TL even convert this into a top lane tower as well. So like, this was a gamble that they took, and there are other examples of these kind of gambles that they take, where it feels like sometimes C9 don't really know what to do when the game is kind of in a neutral, even state. So I don't want to say that they get impatient. I just think that they put this opportunistic mindset on, and they try to take gambles. And I think that it can cost them. And I think it's something worth taking into consideration. So I don't know if this is like a shot calling issue, or if the team just isn't really sure what to do in the mid game if the game is neutral. But you will see these kind of plays from Cloud9, and it can be, and sometimes it pays off, right? Like the whole point of a gamble is that it can land either side of the coin, and that could have been the play that opened up the map. And you can argue that this is both a strength and a weakness, because they will at least take these gambles rather than lose the game. It's very much up to you how you perceive it. And yeah, this can be considered both a strength and a weakness. One sec, I need to burp. Pardon me, sorry once again. So yeah, That's another weakness I think they have. So the biggest and final weakness for Cloud9 is, of course, that Sven is the lifeblood of this team. If he does not get going, then the team doesn't get going. The reason why C9 lost in the final game was because he was shut down early on. He was successfully counter-ganked by Xmithy in the bot lane. Then he ended up dying in the mid lane. We talked about how he tried to help push in mid, and then Jensen ends up killing him. And after that, he just had no impact in the early game. And if the blood is gone to the brain, then the brain doesn't function, and it gets no oxygen, and it dies. And in the same vein, if Svenskeren is not getting if Svenskeren is not doing anything in the early game, and he is not providing that blood, that energy, that oxygen to the team, then it feels to me like that the team starts to crumble. So this is a great opportunity for Sven to prove that he is like one of the best junglers in the world and that he can compete at like the highest level. But he may also just crumble under the might of some of the best junglers that are at this tournament, like Jankos, Clid, Kasa, Broxer, Tian, Canyon, Tarzan, Clid. Like, there are so many good junglers at this tournament. And this would be a great opportunity for Svenskeren to shine. I personally have faith that he can do it. I believe in him. I'm excited for Cloud9, but it is something that you have to be worried about. And the fact that the team kind of relies on him, I think, is concerning. So in terms of expectations for Cloud9, I think that they have slightly better chances than Team Liquid. Because what I saw their short but significant improvement over between the semifinals and the finals, and I think that they can also showcase that improvement between now and groups and during groups themselves. And I also think that their playstyle is just naturally more flexible, so like changes in the meta, they'll be able to adapt to more readily. And I think that I also just I have a bias towards playing more aggressively in the early game. I just think that that is a better way to play. And maybe I'm wrong in that perspective. Like, I talked a lot about it in the LCK video that I made, but I think that style also is just like an inherently better way to play the game in the current meta. And I know some other people disagree with me, which is fine. But that's kind of why I lean more towards C9 having slightly better, providing slightly better hope for NA. And I think naturally, depending on the group that they get in, will determine a lot. But if I was a betting man, for me, I would put more eggs in the Cloud9 basket than I would in the Team Liquid basket. And a large part of that was because of the junglers, as I mentioned. So that kind of does it for all the teams. I talked a lot. In terms of my overall expectations, I do think this looks like a difficult tournament for North America. I think that depending on what LCK shows up will determine a lot. But I definitely think that with the young blood that is now arriving at the World Championship, it's going to be a lot harder for Team Liquid to punish the LCK teams like they were able to last year. But I feel like TL and C9, like, they just sit outside the top teams, right? Like, my current expectations are that LCK, EU, and China are the favorites to like make it out of groups, and like their teams are all very good, and C9 and TL kind of just sit just outside them, and you hope that like they can have those good performances and like groups can go well and like their practice is good and they can show some improvement, because like I don't think there's a lot in order for them to get in. Like, I talked a lot in this game, but like there's like a lot of little small things that if they're just made those adjustments for these players and teams, then they could improve dramatically, in my opinion. But yeah, I think it's important to recognize that a lot can still happen. I don't want to just count North America out, but personally, I would be nervous if I was an NA fan, and I would keep my expectations tempered based on what I've seen. I would not I will end this by saying that I do not think C9 and TL is just an NA RAM team. I do think that they have a pretty good understanding of the game, and I don't think they should be undermined as such. I think that you do have to show respect towards them, and I do hope that I was able to reinforce that they really do have some world-class players on their teams. And I think that they will, they have the potential to show up. I wouldn't put a lot of stock or faith in them right now, But of course, again, a lot can happen. Like I feel like I'm covering my ass because I'm, But I also hope that having watched this video, you can see the evidence that I provided, and you feel free to challenge the evidence. And like, please don't tunnel too much on like the specific examples that I used. Like I have a bunch of them, but I just like pick one or two for the sake of the brevity of the video to just try and reinforce my points. But yeah, we'll see. The Western teams have been surprising a lot over the last 2 years, so you never know. But that's going to do it for episode 2 of the Vedi Show. I do hope that you enjoyed it. The group draw show is going to be on Monday, the 23rd of September, where myself, Ender, and Frost will be talking a lot about the groups and the draw show. I do plan on doing another one of these for both Europe and LPL next week, but unfortunately I will not have time to do them before the group draw. So I'm sorry if you wanted these to come out before, but I just don't have the time. I wanted to thank everyone again for all the love and support on this content piece. It's something that I've been trying, and I've received a lot of really positive messages, and I really do appreciate it. Please keep sending in your feedback. Please keep letting me know your thoughts. I'd really like to know. But that will do it. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good one, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one.